I checked our joint account while he was in the shower. We had 14.82, and rent was due in 2 days. I just sat on the bathroom floor, shaking, while the faucet kept running like nothing was wrong. From the outside, Daniel and Erica looked like any other couple trying to make it work. He worked in IT support at a mid-sized company. She was a freelance graphic designer with a few steady clients. They lived in a small apartment near the city, nothing fancy, but not falling apart either. To their friends, they seemed stable, functional, even lucky. But inside the apartment, the tension had its own weight. It wasn't loud. It didn't explode in shouting matches or slammed doors. It sat in the space between sentences. In the way Daniel stayed up late, just checking things on his laptop, while Erica sat at the kitchen table, silently adding up grocery receipts. In how neither of them said the word money out loud, but both of them were always thinking about it. It started small, like when Erica asked if they could skip takeout for the week and Daniel just nodded, not making eye contact. Or when Daniel mentioned upgrading their internet plan and she paused for a beat too long before answering. Nothing huge, nothing that anyone would call a fight, but the air was getting thick. They hadn't talked about their finances, not really. Their system, if you could call it that, was basically, keep doing what you're doing and hope nothing bad happens. Rent came out of their joint account. Everything else was kind of freestyle. Erica paid for groceries and utilities. Daniel paid for his car and phone. They never planned it that way. It just evolved. And slowly, it stopped working. There was always just enough to cover the basics, but never enough to feel secure. Never enough to relax. If a payment was higher than expected, or a client paid late, or Daniel had to dip into savings for a car battery, something always broke the surface. They didn't say anything, but both of them noticed when Daniel started skipping his morning coffee shop run. Erica didn't bring up the fact that she'd started using a budgeting phone with bright red warning bars that gave her a pit in her stomach every time she opened it. She didn't want to sound like she was blaming him, so she just tried to do better on her own. Daniel noticed the changes, of course. She stopped suggesting date nights. He caught her reusing grocery bags and quietly cutting their weekly expenses. He assumed it was a silent judgmental way of saying you're not doing enough. So, he started hiding things too. A small Amazon purchase here, a new pair of headphones he needed for work, just $70. But he didn't tell her. He used his personal card. By month 3, they were living in 2 different realities, under one roof. One night, they were watching Netflix, half paying attention. The show was on, but neither of them was laughing. Erica looked over and saw Daniel scrolling his phone. She wondered if he was reading about work, or looking at new gadgets, or maybe nothing at all. The distance between them suddenly felt like miles. And still, no one said anything. She didn't ask how his budget was going. He didn't ask why she looked so tired lately. They brushed teeth side by side, slept back to back, smiled for family photos, but a quiet wall was going up. Not made of anger, but made of exhaustion, of fear, of assuming the worst and saying nothing. And in that silence, they both began to believe the same lie. I'm in this alone. It happened on a Thursday. Daniel had just come home from work, shoes still on, keys still in hand, when Erica told him the car wouldn't start that morning. She tried twice before giving up. Called a tow truck, got it to the shop, and waited 2 hours for an answer. The verdict? It wasn't the battery like they hoped, it was the alternator. $800 minimum. Daniel didn't respond right away. He just stood there, still holding his keys, then dropped them on the kitchen counter a little too hard. Erica flinched not at the sound, but at the silence that followed. We don't have 800, he finally said, not looking at her. I know, she answered, but the car needs fixing. He turned toward her, his face tired and frustrated. This keeps happening. Why don't we ever have anything saved? That was it. Just that one line. Not yelled, not cruel, but something about it cracked her open. "Are you serious?" she said, almost laughing. "You think I don't save? Do you even know what our grocery budget is? I'm the one cutting corners everywhere while you keep buying tech stuff we don't need." He stepped back like he'd been slapped. "I work full-time, Erica. I don't see you worrying when we order delivery 3 nights a week. I stopped ordering months ago, Daniel. You just didn't notice." That part hurt, because she was right and he hadn't. The argument spilled out fast, like water from a cracked pipe. 3 months of assumptions, built-up tension, passive-aggressive, silence, all of it finally said out loud, "I'm tired of doing this alone." "So am I. But it always feels like I'm the only one trying. I track every dollar." "Without even telling me? That's not partnership, Erica. That's control." They weren't shouting at the top of their lungs, but every word landed like a punch. Honest. Ugly. Raw. Erica's voice finally cracked. "Do you even want to fix this? Or are we just pretending until it breaks completely?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. And in that moment, she saw the fear. Not anger, not blame, just fear. The same fear sitting in her own chest. "I don't know what we're doing," he said quietly. "I feel like I'm drowning." That night, he slept on the couch. She didn't ask him to. He just didn't come to bed. The apartment was quiet, but not peaceful. He lay there staring at the ceiling fan, feeling ashamed. She lay in their bed, feeling empty. And neither of them knew what to do next. But something had shifted. They had finally said the things they were afraid to say. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't productive, but it was real. And for the first time, it wasn't just in their heads anymore. The silence had broken. And that, somehow, was the first crack of light. The week after the argument felt like walking through fog. Daniel kept leaving early for work, barely saying goodbye. Erica pretended to be asleep when he got home. They texted when necessary. "What time are you back? Did you pay the internet?" But the warmth was gone. Even the cat started acting weird, pacing between them like she sensed something off. Erica spent a lot of time with her headphones in, zoning out to podcasts while editing client work. One afternoon, as she loaded a new episode, she saw one titled, "How Couples Can Finally Talk About Money Without Killing Each Other." She tapped play. The guest was Ramit Sethi. At first, it was just background noise. But then he said something that made her pause. "It's never just about the numbers. It's about the vision. If you don't know where you're going together, no budget in the world will save you." She replayed that line. Twice. Later that night, Daniel came home a little earlier than usual. Erica was sitting at the kitchen table, headphones off, laptop closed. She looked nervous, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since their fight. "I listened to something today," she said quietly. "It made me think." He hesitated, but sat across from her. She slid her phone across the table. "It's a podcast, Ramit Sethi. I think we should listen to it. Together." Daniel nodded slowly. It wasn't a yes or a no, just an opening. They didn't listen that night, but the next evening, after dinner, Erica brought it up again. Daniel plugged in a speaker. They sat on the couch and let the voice fill the room. The episode wasn't magic. It didn't solve anything instantly, but it gave them language, permission, a way to start without pretending they had it all figured out. After it ended, there was a long pause. Erica looked down at her lap. "I don't want to be your accountant," she said. "I want to be your partner." Daniel stared at the dark screen where the podcast app had closed. Then he looked at her. "I don't want to feel like I'm failing all the time," he said. "But I do." They sat in that silence, not heavy like before, but honest. That night, they made a deal. No fixing, no blaming, just curiosity. 1 hour, once a week. Phones off, no shame. Just them, talking about money. They picked Sunday nights. The first money talk was awkward. Daniel brought a notebook and forgot a pen. Erica pulled up her budget spreadsheet and immediately apologized for how messy it looked. They both laughed at how serious they were being. But then Daniel said, "Okay, let's start with one question. What stresses you out the most about money?" She told him. He listened. Then she asked him the same. He paused, and then, for the first time, told her about growing up with nothing, how his dad lost his job and they lived off food stamps for a year, how he still feels panic anytime a bank app shows less than $1,000, how he buys gadgets sometimes not because he needs them, but because it makes him feel in control. Erica didn't interrupt, didn't judge. She just listened. That moment didn't fix their finances. But it did something deeper. It made them feel less alone in the problem. By the end of that hour, they hadn't come up with a budget or an action plan, but they'd written one sentence in Daniel's notebook. "We want to feel safe and free." That was the first time they ever talked about money, not as a problem, but as something they could shape together. It wasn't about cutting back. It was about building forward. And for the first time in months, they went to bed facing each other. By their third Sunday night, things started to shift. The meetings were still a little awkward. Daniel brought snacks to make it feel less like a business meeting, and Erica once opened a bottle of wine halfway through, but they were showing up. That alone felt like a small victory. This time, they focused on the numbers. Erica brought up what she called the money leaks. Just 3 things that quietly drain their budget every month. First, overlapping subscriptions. Between both their Spotify accounts, a half-used meal plan, 2 cloud storage plans, and a random newsletter, Daniel didn't even remember signing up, for they were losing $180 a month. Second, impulse food deliveries. "I'm not saying we never order out," Erica clarified, "but do we really need 23 sushi on a Tuesday night just because we're tired?" Daniel smirked. "You liked that sushi." "I did. But I also like sleeping with the lights on and not worrying about whether we can pay the electricity bill." Fair point. Third, ghost charges. Erica showed him how they had been charged late fees 3 times in the last 2 months, once for the internet, once for a credit card, and once for a utilities payment that was set to the wrong date. Daniel felt embarrassed, but not defensive, and that was new. Together, they went through each one, canceled the unnecessary subscriptions, switched their bill due dates to align with their paychecks, set up auto-pay for 2 of the cards. And then came the hard part, the spending plan. They didn't want a budget that made them feel punished. Erica had read enough of Ramit's work by then to introduce a better term, conscious spending plan. It wasn't about restriction. It was about clarity. Spending with intention, not guilt. They divided things into 4 categories. 1. Fixed costs. Rent, utilities, internet, insurance. 2. Investments. Retirement, savings, emergency fund. 3. Guilt-free spending. Eating out, dates, personal hobbies. 4. Savings goals. That vacation they kept postponing. They decided Erica would handle the fixed costs since her freelance work was more predictable month to month. Daniel, whose paycheck fluctuated depending on overtime, would take on guilt-free spending and track it closely. At first, it felt weird, like roommates assigning chores. But it forced them to treat their money like something they both owned, not something they each secretly feared. Daniel surprised Erica by suggesting they set aside $50 a month for a splurge night. No guilt, no rules, just something fun they could look forward to. That Friday, they ordered in from their favorite Thai place, watched a bad romantic comedy, and didn't talk about money once. It wasn't fancy, but it felt earned, peaceful. like they were finally allowed to enjoy each other again. The next Sunday, Erica said something that stayed with Daniel. "I used to think money talks would tear us apart, but I actually feel closer to you now." Daniel didn't say anything right away, just reached across the table and squeezed her hand. He didn't realize until that moment how heavy the quiet resentment had been, how much lighter he felt now that they were doing something, even if it wasn't perfect. That week, Erica stopped checking the bank account every morning out of fear. She still looked, but now with a plan in mind, not panic. Daniel started tracking his spending for the first time ever. Not because someone told him to, but because he actually wanted to understand where his money was going. He even caught himself hesitating before making an impulse purchase at Best Buy and walked out empty-handed. That was a first. They weren't making more money. They weren't debt-free. But something inside them had shifted. It wasn't about chasing some magical financial number anymore. It was about regaining control, together. At the end of the month, they had an extra $312 in their account more than they'd saved in any previous month all year. They didn't celebrate with champagne or Instagram posts. They just looked at the number on Erica's screen, smiled at each other, and sat in that moment. Not rich, but stable, for once. And in that quiet stability, something else began to grow. Hope. It was a Tuesday morning when the email came in. Subject line: contract termination, effective immediately. Daniel read it twice before the words sank in. The tech startup he'd been consulting for had just lost funding. They were cutting external contracts, including his. No warning, no transition, just done. He sat at his desk for 20 minutes, staring at the screen. Then he quietly shut his laptop, walked into the kitchen, and made himself coffee he couldn't taste. He didn't tell Erica that day, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he didn't know how to say it without sounding like a failure. Things had been going so well. They had a system, a rhythm. For once, they weren't panicking every 5 days about rent. And now this. By the third day, Erica noticed something was off. "You okay?" she asked casually while making dinner. "Yeah," he replied too quickly. "Just tired." But on Sunday evening, their regular money talk, Daniel sat at the table and said, "Before we start, I need to tell you something." When he explained, Erica didn't freak out. She didn't yell or cry. She just sat back in her chair and let out a long, quiet breath. Then she said, "Okay, let's look at the numbers." It caught Daniel off guard. He was expecting disappointment, maybe even fear, but not calm. They opened up their spending plan and pulled up the emergency fund. Thanks to their changes over the past few months, they had about $400 saved. Not life-changing, but enough to breathe. They spent that Sunday night not planning a dream vacation or optimizing investments, but in survival mode. Together, they paused their splurge nights. Erica picked up a few extra client gigs, even if it meant longer hours. Daniel applied to everything he could tech support, part-time retail, even considered delivering groceries just to keep cash flowing. And for the first time in their relationship, they didn't let financial pressure pull them apart. One night, about 2 weeks in, Erica came home late from a client meeting, dropped her bag on the floor, and found Daniel folding laundry, a task he usually avoided like the plague. He looked up and said, "We're okay, right?" She nodded. "We're okay." That moment stuck with both of them, not because things were easy, but because they had become a team in a way they never had before. There were still moments of stress. A bill that came in higher than expected. A job Daniel interviewed for but didn't get. But they faced each one together, sitting at the table, looking at the spreadsheet, not pointing fingers. At one point, Erica joked, "We should frame this damn spreadsheet and hang it on the wall." Daniel laughed harder than he had in days. The setback didn't destroy them. It tested them, and they passed. Eventually, Daniel landed a new freelance contract, not as high-paying as the last one, but more stable, more hours. He even negotiated a better rate, thanks to Erica pushing him to ask for what he was worth. When that first paycheck hit their account, they didn't go out to celebrate. They just took a walk, hand in hand. No headphones, no distractions. They talked about what they'd learned, that security wasn't about how much you made, but how well you managed what you had. That peace didn't come from income, but from communication. That it's not the big wins that make or break a relationship, it's how you show up during the in-between. And that spreadsheet? Still taped to the side of their fridge. Coffee stains and all. It wasn't perfect, but neither were they. And somehow, that made it feel even more real. 6 months later, the numbers didn't look that impressive. They weren't rich. There were no viral side hustles, no surprise inheritance, no dream jobs that doubled their income. But the atmosphere in their home was completely different. Mornings were quieter in a good way. Erica made coffee while Daniel packed his lunch for work. They talked about little things, her new client, the neighbor's new dog, whether they should finally replace the shower curtain. There was no undertone of panic, no unspoken dread about what bill might bounce next. On Sunday nights, they still had their money talks, but now the meetings were shorter, less reactive, more like check-ins than crisis sessions. Sometimes they didn't even open the spreadsheet. They just talked about how they felt about money that week, and sometimes that was enough. Daniel no longer flinched when he checked their account balance. He didn't feel like he was in trouble all the time, and Erica stopped tracking every single expense. Not because she gave up, but because she finally trusted the system they'd built. They started saving for a trip to Santa Fe. Nothing extravagant, just a long weekend somewhere with sun, good food, and no laptop bags. It had been on Erica's list for years. Now, it wasn't a fantasy. It was a line item. They also made a small but symbolic change. Separate fun money accounts. Each got $100 a month to spend on absolutely anything. No judgment, no explanations. Daniel used his for books and overpriced coffee gear. Erica spent hers on plants she didn't always manage to keep alive. One Saturday morning, they ran into another couple. They knew Matt and Jess at the farmer's market. After chatting for a bit, the conversation drifted to budgeting. Matt joked about how they always ended up arguing about who spent more on food delivery. Daniel and Erica exchanged a glance. And for the first time, they shared their story not as experts, but as survivors. Erica pulled up their conscious spending plan on her phone and told Jess, "This thing saved our relationship." It wasn't until they walked away that Daniel turned to her and said, "Did you ever think we'd be the ones giving advice?" She smiled. Not in a million years. Later that evening, Erica closed her laptop after sending off a client project, walked into the living room, and looked at the framed sentence Daniel had hung above their desk. "We want to feel safe and free." It was just a line they wrote in a notebook 6 months ago, but it had become something real. Their finances weren't perfect. Their life wasn't perfectly planned. But they had something better. Clarity, calm, and each other. There were still months that felt tight, still days where an unexpected bill would bring back old anxiety. But they handled it together, without blame, without shame. With the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from doing the hard work, 1 week at a time. They didn't need to chase some fantasy of being wealthy. They had built something richer, a partnership where money wasn't the enemy. It was just a tool, and they finally knew how to use it.